What's the emerging role of AI, its opportunities and its risks for the kind of research you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think the opportunities are the same as they are in most businesses. That I think that they can speed things up a lot. They can speed up analysis. They can speed up data collection to some extent. I think they can make surveys more engaging and interesting to people. I think that's what we focus a lot of time on is how do you ask questions in ways that voters can actually answer them with some knowledge. So I think that can be helpful there. I think this idea of synthetic research is real, and I think there's a place for that. But just like anything that's synthetic, it's literally synthetic. It's not original and it's not unique. And so right now, if you put together and spent the time putting together a synthetic panel to talk about data centers nationally, you would get probably pretty good answers. But if you really want to know how to move somebody in a particular county, in a particular place, I think there's always going to be room for that original research.
Well, this week it is certainly a short reach across the aisle, even for an old Kennedy Democrat like me, to welcome one of the most respected analysts, brightest minds, and finest people of the Republican Party. I've worked with Michael Meyers for more than 15 years. I think, Michael, we were both younger when we started this, with growing admiration for his insights, especially for some of our most embattled clients, and with much gratitude to the late Alex Gage, with whom I first worked 44 years ago and who introduced Michael and me. Michael is now Executive Vice President at Tunnl, which, let me use his far more sophisticated words, looks to connect research, audience targeting, and measurements in one closed loop by leveraging an AI-powered platform. Of course, Michael, no one listening to this would think I wrote those words, let alone that I understand them. Michael is also a partner at Deeproot Analytics, which provides many of the same services, along with survey and focus group research for the political world. That's my world. And it's a world that Michael knows well, having worked for President George W. Bush, Governor Mitt Romney, and scores of political candidates and ballot issue campaigns from Maine to Hawaii and Florida to Alaska. This year, Michael's working for Senator Susan Collins in the critical race in Maine. He was working for South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham before his death, Texas Senator John Cornyn before his political death in the primary runoff in Texas. Michael, we want to talk to you about all three of those states, get your national assessment of House and Senate prospects, any views you've got on what 28 is starting to look like, your view of emerging issues, especially the increasingly more controversial data centers, and the latest developments in research, especially the role of AI. But let's start with your native state of Michigan. Granted, this requires you to reach across the aisle. What are the Democrats doing in that Senate race?
It's really gotten heated, both just in the competitive nature of it, and the rhetoric is flying pretty heavy on both sides. I was trying to think back to when the Tea Party first showed up of whether our rhetoric was as heated as this, and it probably was. But there's a lot of upset being thrown back and forth by both the more establishment Democrats and this rising DSA progressive element that we're seeing play out both on the statewide level in the Senate race and especially in the mid-Michigan congressional district that Tom Barrett holds today.
If you had to bet your money today, where will the Democrats end up when the votes are counted?
I think if I had to put money down, I wouldn't want to put a lot, but I think El Said's got the momentum on the Senate side. I think the best quote I heard was to an unattributed Democrat that everything says that Stevens should win, whether it's history or fundraising. that she should have the advantage. It just doesn't feel that way. So we'll see how it plays out. The current polling has it pretty dead heat. He seems to have an advantage when you boil it down to more enthusiastic voters. So we'll see how that plays out. I think it's interesting that the primary will be in August, before the kids get back to school. A little harder to rally some of the campuses that might have been easier to rally to a Bernie Sanders, AOC, El-Sayed cause. So we'll see how that plays into it. But I think it'll probably be a long night for those two to wade through.
Assuming it's El-Sayed, let's go with your modest bet. Then what does November look like?
I think Michigan's always going to be competitive. If you get one of the two party nominations, you're going to be competitive. But I think I would probably go to sleep a little easier if I was Mike Rogers with El-Sayed as the nominee versus Haley Stevens.
Significant attention being paid internally or externally in either the Jewish or the Arab communities.
Yeah, Michigan's home to pretty large communities of both of those, probably more famously for the Middle Eastern community, especially around the Detroit area, Dearborn, Hamtramck, sort of the surrounding areas there. So there's certainly attention being paid to those. They're getting a good amount of publicity. I don't know that either one of them is large enough to tip the balance, really. There was a lot of attention paid in the run up to the 2024 campaign with that. So we'll see how that comes together. But I don't think either one of those is probably determinative, but I think it's a good demonstration of how difficult it is to assemble a coalition to put together a winning element for either side. And it's why Michigan's so competitive. There's a lot of varying factions. There's lots of groups that weigh in, feel strongly about each other. How quickly can you coalesce those back around a primary? The unions have split on some of these endorsements. How quickly can they come back together on the Democratic side? The Republican side, we've got a pretty heated primary on the gubernatorial side. But that one's a little less focused on real issues and more on style than substance, I think, which is a little easier to overcome after a primary. I'll be interested to see how long and to what extent the Democrats are able to make peace, regardless of who their nominee is at the statewide level.
What's November look like in that governor's race to you?
I think everything currently shows that Benson's the Democrat. She's the current Secretary of State. She's had a fairly easy primary to deal with. She's probably got the advantage. Polling probably shows her up, 5-6 points. I don't think that's a whole lot. You get a little effect from having a Republican primary that you've got some Republicans that don't want to say they're voting for the Republican they're not voting for in the primary. So again, I think it'll be pretty competitive. Certainly it'll be more competitive than we saw 4 years ago, where Gretchen Whitmer was able to win fairly easily and handily over the Republican nominee. I think John James is a terrific Republican candidate. Perry Johnson obviously brings a lot of money to the table if he were to win. So I think it's just a much more competitive environment than we saw 4 years ago.
Interesting. Well, not that you ever claim to be an expert on Democrats, but you live closer to Wisconsin and Minnesota than I do. What are you seeing in that Wisconsin governor's race to the extent you're watching it?
Yeah, I probably haven't paid enough attention to that one, but I think you've got kind of a similar dynamic. The Democrats can't quite seem to figure out what they want to be when they grow up this year. And I think it'll be a lot of the same kind of dynamics there of how can you coalesce people back together and get focused on November versus wanting to continue to fight along the way. Minnesota, I think, is a different kind of dynamic. The fraud and the scandals that are playing out there are a little more isolated into Minnesota. I think that Republicans have more opportunities there than people are probably giving them credit for. So we'll see how Minnesota comes along on the plate there, and especially looking at the state legislature and control there. And I think as we look broader out across the landscape, you're going to see a lot of hand-to-hand fights at very local levels for controls of these state legislatures. as we move into November. I think like a lot of those will generate a lot of heat and interest as well.
Yeah, Cook and Sabato have both been paying increasing attention to those state legislatures.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you about some races I know you know about. You were working for Senator Graham before his passing in South Carolina. Uh, his sister is now, having been appointed to the seat, proposing to try to keep it, which requires winning a primary and a runoff. How's that going to shake out?
Yeah, you think you've seen sort of every combination of how elections can run and different ways that things can work out, but boy, this tight timeline in South Carolina is really, really fascinating to watch play out. And you've got so many competing interests and so many people that are involved in this that I think it's hard to tell how that shakes out, and there's barely time to even do polling, let alone really raise money or really get your name out there. So it's a real race, and a real again almost kind of hand to hand of who can turn out their voters better than anybody else.
It's what, August 11th primary, 25th runoff,
Yeah.
like that.
Yep.
That's extraordinary. Do any of the members of Congress that are running for it have sufficient statewide ID, or do they have to establish that between now and August 11th?
Yeah, I think they're going to have to establish that, and obviously running against a couple of people that do have more statewide ID. I think those campaigns probably, do you really focus on turning out your geographic base, or do you really, or versus how many resources do you expend to try to, get a full statewide name ID and with some actual recognition behind it, is a tough thing to come up to. And like I said, you almost don't have time to make that decision. You got to just almost go with your gut and what you think is right out there. A single poll will tell you, what the picture looks like, but boy, it's hard to tell where to go from just one snapshot like that, and you just don't have much time to adjust.
And of course, I don't think any question in anyone's mind, the seat stays Republican in November, regardless of who wins. Well, a state that can't be counted that assuredly in either column is Maine, where you're working for Senator Collins as she runs for her 6th term and has finally found out who her opponent is going to be.
We assume.
Without asking you to reveal anything from the senator's polling, where do you see that race today?
Yeah, I think for all the ups and downs and twists and turns it's taken, it's probably about where you would think it would be in, if we went back in time to January or 2 years ago or 3 years ago or 5.5 years ago. Senator Collins has got her work cut out for her. There's nobody better positioned to figure out how to get that work done than her and her team. And they're going to face a Democrat who's formidable, because Maine is a tough state for Republicans to win in. But as you said, she's figured out how to do it in the past. Maine has a pretty rich history of voting for Republicans that look and feel a lot like her. And so I think the race isn't that fundamentally different than what she was prepared for, 2, 3, 4 years ago, let alone 6 months ago, just a different face than we probably thought we would have.
Yeah. Well, Charlie Cook said the other day, I asked him his assessment. He said exactly where it was before Plattner got in the race.
Yeah, right.
He would agree with you. My wife, who is from West Virginia and therefore can knowledgeably make this statement, always refers to Maine as West Virginia with a coastline. And I think she's onto something. Shift gears. Well, let me ask you one other main question.
Mm-hmm.
LePage being on the ballot for that congressional race, does that help or hurt the statewide GOP where he's on the ballot?
I think he, clearly has a name ID and has a perception, and I think that he fits that part of Maine pretty well. And I certainly don't think he's a drag. I don't tend to think congressional candidates really move the top of the ticket. I think it's usually the other way around. I think both sides are pretty committed to spending an awful lot of money on those statewide races. I'm not sure we that the congressional races will have that much impact up to the top of the ballot.
Well, let's shift geography to Texas. You worked for Senator Cornyn, who got 42% of the vote in the primary, forced into a runoff by Attorney General Paxton, and defeated in the runoff by maybe 1% of the population of Texas is the vote difference, but nonetheless decisive. So you've got a Paxton Tallarico race in November, governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, land commissioner, railroad commissioner, everything else on the ballot, and a governor and lieutenant governor who I think everybody is convinced will win, perhaps not by the margin of previous years, but will win. Texas Tribune this morning had a poll out showing Tallarico up by 5 points, but of course the Republican ad onslaught hasn't hit yet. How do you see Texas?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think we did lose a good public servant, very good public servant in Senator Cornyn. I think it's a shame that he won't be coming back. But I think we've also kind of seen this story play out over the years before that Beto O'Rourke was going to beat Ted Cruz, and he got close. And I think Democrats have long thought that they were one cycle away from recapturing it. It wasn't too long ago that Governor Abbott was going to get beat. That was 2 or 3 terms ago now. So I suspect that it will be tight. I think we'll continue to see some polling that shows the Democrats with some hope. But I think Republicans will generally come home. I think that the fact that the rest of the top of the ticket is very strong, that Governor Abbott is going to run through the tape. He's always been a very committed supporter of the party and making sure that turnout efforts are there and things are in place. They've got smart legislative folks working on campaigns. I think everyone's got the message that this could be tougher than it would have been otherwise. But I think up and down the rest of the ticket, they're ready to do what's needed, and I think that will help all the Republicans in Texas.
Speaking of former public servants, can Sherrod Brown make a comeback in Ohio?
Well, it's just hard to see. I mean, the national mood just isn't really dying for former office holders who got beat and then want to come back again. It just doesn't fit the mold that well. He's obviously a respected, voice in a lot of parts of the state, and has gotten a lot of votes before. But I think it's a really tough road there. But again, I don't think, I kind of look at both Ohio and Florida, I kind of put in the same basket. That I think people forget that those were swing states not very long ago. And so I always caution people to keep their eyes on those two places, that there's a lot of people that, probably would like to be Democrat that just haven't found a Democrat that they can embrace. And I'm not sure they've got the right folks at this point either on the Democratic side, but there's certainly a lot of, probably pent up, Democrat leanings in both of those states that wouldn't mind finding the right kind of Democrat to vote for.
Well, speaking of Democratic prospects, does Ossoff survive in Georgia?
That's one I probably haven't spent as much time looking at. And again, I mean, that's a good example, right? 5-6 years ago, you wouldn't have envisioned that you'd have 2 Democrat senators from Georgia. And so I certainly don't think he can be taken lightly. I think he'll get a solid challenge there. Can he survive? Yeah, he probably can. But I certainly don't think it's a race that will go by without a strong fight.
Any surprises that you see out there? North Carolina, New Hampshire, Iowa, Alaska.
It's the kind of cop out answer, right? Of like, hey, if there's a wave, what happens?
Sure.
I think Alaska is pretty tough for the Democrats to overcome. Senator Sullivan has done a good job up there. There's no reason to think that there's anything wrong with his brand up there. Again, you kind of got a retread Democrat running again. I'm not sure that fits the time and the mode. And I think Republicans have a little sorting out to do. There's a little bit of I think the concern on our side is more about making sure our voters actually turn out and show up. And that when you look at the coalition that elected President Trump 2 years ago, how do you make sure that the same share of those voters that show up again, and that happens places like Iowa and Alaska stay off the map pretty easy. But if you get 5 or 6 points that drop off of that, all of a sudden that becomes pretty competitive. I certainly would keep my eyes on Iowa. I think that's probably more, if I were looking for a surprise place, I would probably be looking there versus the other states. I think you've got a more competitive governor's race there than people had expected a couple of years ago or even a couple months ago. And so I think that'll drive some interest in Iowa as well.
Yeah, I think Rob's saying that Democratic nominee in Iowa is the best the Democrats have this year. He's turned in a stunning performance. Assuming the courts allow him to stay on the ballot, what mischief does the second Sullivan create in Alaska?
Yeah. I mean, I've seen these games play out a lot. I'm not sure I've ever seen them actually work. I can remember state legislative races. We had like 4 versions of a guy named Sal Rocca running on the ballot. There probably was a time where those things worked, where you just couldn't get a message out. But I don't think you cause a lot of confusion up there. I think people know who the senator is, and I think they know who the Democrat is, and they'll sort that out. I don't, if it comes down to a couple hundred votes, like we've seen some elections, sure, anything could tip it. But I don't think it's likely that's going to play a major role. And it's kind of a shame that in today's world we still allow these kind of games to go on here.
Among the other questions I got asked after a speech last week is, what role will ranked choice voting have on the impact of the 2 Dan Sullivans? And of course, I don't think there is an answer to that. We'll find out on election day.
Yeah, we will find.
It further complicates it.
Yeah.
So what's the Senate look like on November 4th?
I mean, I think by all accounts, you would be on safe ground saying that the Republicans control the Senate. I don't see that happening. And then I think if we literally mean that next morning, I don't think we're going to know who controls the House, if for no other reason than California can't seem to count ballots within a week or two. And we'll kind of have to wait and see how those come in. But I think it'll be a real fight. I don't think either side's going to have a great working majority. I certainly think the Republicans have some opportunities to hold those seats. I think that a lot of that probably depends on some Democrat nominees still emerging out of these late primaries and how those come together. And then, I think that today's world, it just, things move so much faster. Where are we at with Iran? Where are gas prices at when early voting starts? Where are they at halfway through early voting? And where are they at on election day? I think those will be big indicators. I look at the generic congressional race. If you look back to the last, big wave years, the Democrats were more, +8, +12. If you go back to 2006, they look right now about +4, +5. I think if you ran the models, that's like just enough that they could win. But they also tend to the generic ballot does tend to move back towards Republicans as we get to election day, if we look at history. If we look at the 2018 cycle, where you had the same kind of dynamic going on, in July, they had a much bigger advantage than they had by the end. And so I think that Republicans will largely come back home. I think we're missing a point or two there. So I think the House either way will be close, but I wouldn't be shocked to wake up and see the Republicans maintaining control and Speaker Johnson maintaining his job.
Well, to your point about how fast things move, we noted that in California, from the time the stories broke on Swalwell till he was off the ballot was like 72 hours.
Yeah.
Was, 3 days.
Yep.
For something that in a different era, a candidate might have survived.
Yeah. Well, that just totally changed the dynamic out there. Javier Becerra wasn't really even on people's minds until he dropped out, and all of a sudden he passed by a lot of candidates that people thought were more interesting and more exciting, and California Democrats decided to go with someone that hadn't really been even in the top tier of polling prior to that. So it's very interesting and very fast-moving.
The Trump effect on the midterms. Obviously, midterms are, a vote on the incumbent president, always. And President Trump has personalized it and intensified it more than usual. Generally, his endorsements have prevailed in the primaries, with few exceptions. Uh, Charlie Cook has said if former Trump voters are unhappy with the nominee, whether it's a Paxton in Texas or whomever it might be, they're not going to vote Democrat. They'll just stay home. Does that ring with you?
Yeah, that does ring with me. I think that's right, and it's when I keep looking at it, it's not so much that there's a Republican turnout problem, but it's that Trump coalition. It's sort of the group of people that put Trump over the top. Do they show up again and vote for the Republican? I think that's the real key to this. Is those voters clearly didn't like the vice president when she was running, decided to go with Trump, and Republicans need to hold on to that part of the coalition, and that's to me proving to be the trickier part in the summer, at least, of getting those people motivated and understanding the stakes the way they understood them 2 years ago.
Well, the legend in my native Missouri was always the primaries the first week of August, because that's when Kansas City boss Tom Pendergast wanted it, because only his voters would turn out.
Yes. Politics is a matter of timing, if you haven't heard that one before.
Yeah, I've rumors have reached me. Michael, one last question on the political front. Long range view of 28. How do you see the dance? Certainly the dance of the elephants, but even of the donkeys.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you start with the donkeys, I can't imagine a more wide open sort of setup than you've got there. I think if former vice president decides she wants to run again, I think that complicates everybody's lives. As little as I know about the Democratic Party, I can't imagine that she gets the nomination, but she probably freezes a lot of endorsements. She probably freezes a bunch of people. And then it's sort of that like Bill Clinton did when he ran, like who's bold enough to get in and run against her? Who wants to take that leap? And I think that'll be certainly interesting to watch. If she doesn't get into it, I think it's really wide open. I think there's a lot of folks that will come out and want to run. The number of Congress people that think that they can run obviously don't fare well usually, but there's a lot of interest obviously in the AOCs of the world and folks like that, Ro Khanna, the folks that on the more progressive side of the left, how and when they coalesce and come together will be certainly interesting to watch. I think on our side, it's not hard to imagine that it's not very interesting. That Vice President Vance decides that he wants to run, the president decides he's the right guy, but it's a lot to try to overcome. If for some reason the vice president decided that it wasn't the right time for him and his family, then again, I think you've got a real wide open race on our side.
Back to the Dems for a second. Gavin Newsom is in many ways an extraordinarily attractive and appealing candidate. Can a governor of California, a Democratic governor of California, to distinguish him from the late President Reagan and the late Senator Richard Nixon from California, can a Democrat from California be elected nationally?
Yeah, I mean, I think generically, I think they could. I mean, we saw one almost get elected this last time, a few 100,000 votes here and there, and it would have happened. So, yeah, I certainly wouldn't dismiss out of hand for that. I think he's a more clever, nimble politician probably than the vice president was, and I would certainly take him seriously.
Let me shift to the issues side. You and I spent a lot of time toiling together in the energy arena, and of course, it's all consumed by data centers these days. Is the tide running against data centers rising as badly as the media portrays it? Is there genuine opposition out there? And if so, what's driving it with voters?
Yeah, I mean, I think to the first analogy, I think that the the tide is difficult right now on data centers, that the opposition has certainly risen, but I do really think it is the tide and that it will kind of come in and out. I think that the the folks that are focused on the data centers and getting these things built, that they're obviously a huge investment to the country. I think they're obviously something that needs to be built. They're better to be built here than other places. I think they were a little slow to get their message out and explain that to the American people, especially in the places where these want to be built. And so I think you've got, the opposition, I think, is sort of grounded in some traditional things that we see on lots of big projects. But I also think there's some different elements to it, that you've got, folks that just are scared of a big project coming in, whether that, is a Ford motor plant coming into their community. They, would ask some tough questions on that. So you've got, what you might kind of describe as sort of a typical, NIMBY maybe is the word for it, but, concerned about water, concerned about land use, generally concerned about what's going to happen. And then I think you've got people that to some extent are scared about what's in the building. Data centers themselves, as we've talked about, aren't brand new. These have been around for a long time. But what's going inside these buildings is different, and the scale of them is different. And, I think people have some real hesitancies and concerns about the AI and what that can power and what that will do, for their jobs, to a large extent, what will it do to their kids' jobs, and do we want to be helping that happen, or is there some way to slow that down? And I think that the data centers have moved quickly into some of these communities, and I think they expected to be welcomed with a little more open arms than they were. I think there were some governors that really cheered these projects on that now don't have to face the individual communities that these are in. And so it's just taking a little time to I think, talk to the actual voters. And I think most of these folks are they're what you expect them to be. They're middle of America. They live in more rural areas, and they want to be talked to and respected and make sure that they're getting some benefits out of these projects that are showing up. And I think the data center operators and developers are getting that message.
Will Trump's basic message resonate with those folks that we've got to beat China in the AI race, and that people are already using AI, if only to organize the protests against the data centers, and the data centers will pay their own way? Will that work?
Yeah, I think that last piece is a big part of it. That I think a year or two ago there wasn't really this agreement that they should pay their own way. I think that's probably going to happen more and more, and will be required more and more as we look at that. And then I think the last piece of it is that folks have to explain why they need to be built here. Why did you pick my community? And make sure that they can understand, that the idea that they need to be built and the idea that they need to be built in America probably resonates and will help along the lines. But, then why do they need to be built in this county, in this township, as opposed to the next county over, or maybe in Nebraska instead of in Texas, or maybe in Oklahoma instead of Nebraska, whatever the case may be.
Well, last area I wanted to explore with you, you have several times we've made reference to AI. When you think about the research business, if not when you started, certainly when Alex started, we were still going door to door from, selected points on a map, doing in-person interviews. What's the emerging role of AI, its opportunities and its risks for the kind of research you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think the opportunities are the same as they are in most businesses, that I think that they can speed things up a lot. They can speed up analysis. They can speed up data collection to some extent. I think they can make surveys more engaging and interesting to people. I think that's what, we focus a lot of time on is how do you ask questions in ways that, voters can actually answer them with some knowledge. So I think that can be helpful there. I think this idea of synthetic research is real, and I think there's a place for that. But just like anything that's synthetic, it's literally synthetic. It's not original, and it's not unique. And so, right now, if you put together and spent the time putting together a synthetic panel to talk about data centers nationally, you would get probably pretty good answers. But if you really want to know how to move somebody in a particular county, in a particular place, I think there's always going to be room for that original research. And I don't think it's a whole lot, I think I've always thought, that polling is a real intersection of art and science. And I think that AI can help with that science part of it, but I think it's always going to struggle with the art part of it. And so I think that there's always going to be a need for original research, the same way that there's always going to be need for some original literature, and there's going to be need for original music and all of that type of stuff. So I think we'll continue to see AI grow, and it will become part of the process as we move forward. But I certainly don't think it replaces the actually talking to real people in real places.
Got it. Michael, thank you for this. We're grateful for your insight, as we have been for decades. We're going to explore data centers in more detail on these podcasts. It is clearly a critical issue for communities, for industries, and for America. And look forward to getting you back on here after the election to explain why you and I weren't nearly as wrong as we appeared to be.
That sounds good. I've certainly appreciated the partnership and the friendship over the years, and glad to be back on.
Thank you much.
All right, take care.
Across the dusty roads, hear the organ play. Packed up my Chevy at the break of day, headed east on 2-lane highways. Stopped in a town where the courthouse stands, shook every hand, felt the dreams and their plans. From small town porches to the steps of state lines, voices rising up in proud design. Grassroots hearts can change the course we're on. One by one we'll carry on. In the Capitol halls, I joined the crowd. Spoke for the hopeful, spoke for the loud. Heard every story written in calloused hands. Found every neighbor in these scattered lands. From small town porches to the steps of state lines, voices rising up in proud design. Grassroots hearts can change the course we're on. One by one we'll carry on. From small town porches to the steps of state lines, voices rising up in proud design. Grassroots hearts can change the course we're on. One by one we'll carry on.